this is part 2 of a video that I did on counseling and helping relationships, and just a little bit about me. I'm using this as an extension of my study prep. So I take a lot of notes, and I've been studying for the past few months. So I took all my notes and I made it into kind of a digestible PowerPoint and a video, which I wish that I had to go over all of the concepts in this section of the study prep. So for this video, I will be going into the humanistic, existential, cognitive, and any theories that kind of slip through the cracks or concepts that I was seeing in a lot of the questions. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right, somehow that was easier to share screen last time, but we're finally here. So this is part 2 of the counseling and helping relationships section. So as I said in my last video, I'm a visual learner, and also I was having trouble with all of the names, the millions of names that were in the purple book and my pocket prep questions. So I like to put the pictures of these people in here so we can get to know, feels like we're getting to know them. Okay, so just quickly, with cognitive theories, there is this kind of umbrella of like CBT, cognitive behavioral theory, and within that, there is many different contributors, with the main two that are kind of talked about with relation to CBT are Beck, which is this wonderful man in the middle with the bow tie, and then on the left, this is Ellis. And for the questions, I want to say that CBT, if they ask you for whatever reason who is, credited for CBT, they will probably be talking about Beck. But I doubt they're going to ask you that, because that's kind of like a dicey question. In any case, so just quickly going through, we have Ellis, who's actually known for REBT, which is kind of the precursor to modern CBT. And then Beck is known for cognitive theory. That's actually what it's called. And then on the right, we have Dr. Marsha Linehan, and she is credited for DBT, okay, which is super genius. We'll get into that. And then on the bottom left is Arnold Lazarus, and then on the right is Donald Meichenbaum, okay? So Ellis came up with REBT, which is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And the main thing to know here is that there's this kind of A, B, C, D, E structure. And A is the activating event. So for this, I'm going to give the example of someone goes into work and their boss looks super angry and cranky, just looks off that day. Okay, so that's activating event. And then the belief, right, is the belief that the client or the person applies to that. So it's usually in this language, must, should, have to, or need to. And this is where that kind of like a unhelpful belief may come in. Okay, so the person might think, I must have done something to piss off my boss. I should have worked harder and he wouldn't be mad, or I need to, whatever. Okay, so the belief is, there's some sort of distorted belief here. And then the consequence is this person feels like crap. Okay, as you can see, this little guy huddling in the corner, he might feel sad, anxious, he's shaking. And maybe he even withdraws from his boss, tries to avoid his boss, or he's so stressed out about his work and now he's making silly mistakes, okay? And then the disputing intervention, this is where the therapist comes in, or we teach the client to be able to do this themselves, is questioning that belief. Okay, so the disputing intervention goes back to the belief. You're questioning it, you're editing the belief, and hopefully coming up with a new, effective new belief. Okay, so if you look in this bottom left corner, this is kind of how the structure works. So the activating event, or here it's called adversity. Then there's the irrational belief. But if we continue along that irrational belief, then we get the emotional and behavioral consequences. But if we dispute it, as soon as we get that irrational belief, then we can have a new effective rational belief. Okay, so now this young man is feeling, maybe he's not as super happy as we see in this picture, but maybe he's better able to tolerate his boss looking cranky and upset. And he's like, okay, I'm nervous to be around my boss, but I can do hard things, I can regulate, and I'm going to do my best at work today. Okay, so the assumption with REBT is that humans are naturally goal-oriented, but they can also be irrational. And it also assumes that thoughts, emotions, and behavior are connected. So that should sound familiar if you know anything about CBT. Thoughts, emotions, and behavior are all influencing each other. Okay. So that brings us to Aaron Beck. And his theory is technically called cognitive therapy. And he came up with this CBT triangle. So this is the idea we were just talking about, how thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are connected. Well, he basically put it into this concept of a triangle, right? So the thoughts are actually at the top of the triangle because that has a lot of importance, in starting this, or where as therapists we might be able to intervene. Okay, so the goal with cognitive therapy is to help people become aware of and change the way they think and act to reduce stress. So if I'm constantly thinking every day, I suck at counseling, okay, then I'm going to be super nervous, and when I go in to meet my clients, so that's how I'm feeling. I'm going to feel anxious, and maybe I'm going to start stuttering and stumbling on my words with my clients and not be able to actually actively listen to them. Okay, so that's how the thoughts are going to influence my emotions and my behaviors, and my thoughts are going to go the other way, right? So my thoughts are going to influence my behaviors, and then once I mess up with counseling, I'm going to feel even more so like I am nervous, and then I'm going to think even more so that I suck. So it's that interplay between these three ideas. And then what we're going to try and do as counselors is to help the person change their thoughts and also how they're acting to help them feel a little bit better. So the main one of the main interventions is challenging cognitive distortions, which we will talk about more on the next slide. And the idea is when somebody is constantly thinking to themselves, I suck at this, or I am a bad person, or whatever it is, then it becomes like an automatic thought. But if they start to practice challenging that slowly over time, the thoughts will change and it'll be more automatic for them to think more adaptively. So Socratic dialogue is one of the techniques. So it'll be like, what's the evidence of this? So what if it does happen, right? So if the person's thinking the worst case scenario, okay, so what if your partner actually goes out and cheats on you? What will happen then, right? It sounds kind of tough, but it helps the person who is kind of catastrophizing to realize that they are able to maybe function and withstand more than they thought. Okay. And then The cognitive triad is this concept where Aaron Beck studied many individuals who had depression, and he started to notice these common themes. So a lot of these individuals had negative views about the self, about others, and future. So when they had these three things, that was associated with depression. So, and this might be worded differently in different places. So negative views about the self could be worded as worthlessness, and then negative views about the future might be worded as hopelessness. But generally, these three were seen in people who had depression, and it also is implied like that the thought process is contributing to the depression. So if we can intervene using CBT, hopefully they will have more rational thoughts, which is going to help them feel better. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the cognitive distortions. So these are just a few. There's more examples, but these are some key ones. So the first one is all or nothing thinking, which might also be described as black or white thinking. So the thought process might be like this person either loves me or they hate me. Okay. Or like, in terms of relationship, this person wants to marry me right now, or they're just taking me along for a ride and they really don't want anything to do with me. So that is the all or nothing thinking. Catastrophizing is imagining the worst case scenario. So this is like a lot of people do this, right? So it might be like their source of anxiety is coming from imagining what's the worst thing that could happen. So maybe somebody's really scared to drive over a bridge and they're thinking of the worst case scenario. So I'm going to drive over the bridge and some car is going to come and sideswipe me and I'm going to fall off the bridge. Okay. So that is kind of the worst case scenario thinking, or, in relationships, it could be like, oh, my partner is going out for dinner with a coworker. Oh, I think they're going to cheat. They're definitely going to cheat on me, right? So thinking about the worst case scenario. Mind reading is when someone assumes they know what the other person is thinking, or they assume the other person knows what they're thinking. So with couples, a lot this comes up, and it's like, oh, my partner should know that I want flowers for Valentine's Day. So you're expecting the other person to know what you want without actually speaking up for yourself, or vice versa. My boss is angry at me because I didn't do XYZ, and that's why they look cranky today. Next one is mental filtering. So this is when there's all of these things happening, but you're only filtering out the so you're only letting the negative come through your filter. So how did my week go? I did this, that, and the other. Maybe I laughed, maybe I cried, whatever, but you're only remembering the negative parts of it. You're remembering when you cried. You're remembering when you spilled your coffee. You're remembering only negative parts, okay? And this could also be selective abstraction. Okay, so labeling is when something happens and then you basically are labeling yourself based off of that one or that specific set of experiences. So I went for public speaking and I totally messed it up. Therefore, I am a terrible public speaker, okay? Or, for example, you go out with your friends and you say something weird, okay? And you come home and I'm like, I'm a clown, right? You're like, I'm a clown. They're saying that weird thing, right? No, you're not a clown. Maybe you just said one weird thing, or maybe that weird thing wasn't that big of a deal. Okay. So the next one is personalizing. So this is where you think that basically like everything is your fault. So similar to the boss example, right? Where the boss is angry and you assume that's about you, or my parents got a divorce. Oh, it's because of me that they got a divorce. Okay. Or these are kind of examples of personalizing. So taking things onto you that really you're not responsible for. Okay. So the next theory is DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. This theory is actually really genius. So Marsha Linehan developed this when she was working with clients, a lot of whom had suicidality or borderline personality disorder. And with, borderline personality disorder, but also kind of with suicidality too, people really, have that black or white thinking. So the D in dialectical, it means two things can be true at once. So it's teaching the clients that both can be true. So with borderline personality disorder, for example, someone might, like, it's common to think, oh, this is my favorite person in the world, or no, they're literally my worst enemy. Okay. It's this dichotomy of if I'm struggling to explain this. So it's very black or white. So they may switch, between believing the worst about somebody and the best about somebody, or feeling that somebody, or they can also feel that way about themselves, which causes a lot of distress. So it's teaching the client kind of the opposite of that, a more healthy way of thinking, which is less stressful, which is okay. Maybe you and your partner fought, but that doesn't mean that, they hate you and you're going to be alone forever, right? It's trying to control for those extremes in thinking. And then it combines CBT and mindfulness derived from Zen Buddhism. So it's teaching clients a lot of skills for emotion regulation. And then the modality is typically, so this is something you'll often see at PHP or an IO, not maybe an IOP, so PHP, IOP, or even, I'm not sure, but I think in hospital settings too. But it's helping the client stabilize because you're operating in these four domains, which is emotion regulation, distress tolerance, mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness. These are really the skills that you're teaching the client. There's a lot of teaching involved to help them regulate and to feel more stable, rather than doing more of that like deeper past trauma kind of work. You're really helping them to get to a more stable place before you tackle any of that stuff. Okay. It looks like I put her birthday here, May 5th, 1943. She's still alive and well. So happy birthday to her soon, in a few months. Okay. So multimodal therapy. Sorry for the typo. So this is Arnold Lazarus. He came up with multimodal therapy, which I love that these cognitive theories, a lot of them have this, what is this called? So like acrostic poem. I think that's what it's called, but it's like these acronyms. So basic id. okay, is the acronym for multimodal therapy. And multimodal therapy is really about combining all these different facets of of what contributes to mental health and wellness. So behavior, affective response, which is emotions, sensation, which is physical experiences, imagery, which is mental pictures, cognitions, which are our thoughts, interpersonal relationships, and then drugs. And I think the D also, drugs and biology. That's part of it too. So for people who like kind of more of a holistic view of what's going on, I feel like this is perfect. It's incorporating really almost every part of the human experience. And it falls under a cognitive type of therapy. I think it falls under CBT too. I don't know. You can double check me on that. It's called a behaviorist kind of therapy. So the next person is Donald Meischen, and he also contributed towards CBT, which, as we were talking about, is kind of like an umbrella. So his contributions were instruction training, which we know as cognitive restructuring. So that's like restructuring your thoughts, and over time, having more healthy, adaptive, automatic thoughts. And then stress inoculation training. You're going to monitor the impact of your inner dialogue. So it's like 3 steps. So you're monitoring, how is talking this way about myself making me feel, right? And how is it making me act? So you're observing what's going on. Then you rehearse new self-talk. So I've done this with a client before, and it's like you help them come up with almost like a new script, a new way of talking, and then you're going to have them apply it. So practice talking this way about yourself. Did you practice it this week? You're applying it to the stressors. It's pretty cool. I think he's still alive too. There you go. Existential and humanistic therapies. Okay, so now we're really getting into, so this whole video, we're getting more into more of the modern therapies. The first person we're going to talk about is Viktor Frankl. He was an amazing person. So he had this like crazy life. He was a survivor, a Holocaust survivor, and he lost several of his family members to the Holocaust. And he came up with this theory, which is based on existentialism. And it's really something. It's beautiful. It's healing through meaning. Okay, so everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, okay? The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That is like so powerful, right? So he believed that even when you get everything taken from you, it's about how you kind of interpret things and what your attitude is, how you make meaning. Okay, so he came up with the technique of paradoxical intention, so advising the client to purposefully exaggerate a dysfunctional, I don't know why I said dysfunctional, but it's just some sort of dysfunctional symptom, okay? So for example, the client is feeling really nervous and shaky and jittery. So he might tell the client to really start shaking and being as jittery and moving about as much as possible. Okay, so exaggerating that thing. Or for example, somebody is fighting a lot with their partner, so he may instruct them to go and fight even more with their partner. Existentialism rejects behaviorism and psychoanalysis. So this is kind of, he didn't really believe in, or, existentialists generally didn't really believe in behaviorism because there's a space between, I think there's a quote which is like, there's a space between the behavior, or like the stimulus and the behavior, where the person kind of chooses what they want to do. And then he also rejected psychoanalysis because it's not all about what happened to you, but also what you do with it. Okay. So he assumes that, or this theory kind of assumes that we are moving towards, or, we are meant to move towards growth and self-actualization. And then free choice, decision, and will are emphasized. So existentialists generally have these three concepts of Umwelt, Mitwelt, and Eigenwelt. So Umwelt is the physical world, okay, your body, instincts, environment, and nature. And then Mitwelt is the relationship world, relationships, community, how you relate to others. So in the purple book, he gives a nice way to remember these. So Mitwelt starts with M, so we can think of marriage. That'll remind us of relationships. And then Eigenwelt is the identity world, how you experience and understand yourself internally. So that kind of it sounds like you're saying I in the beginning. So it may remind you of yourself or identity. And then Umwelt is just the other one. So you might think the physical world. This is so weird, but I just look at the U and somehow that reminds me of something round, like the earth. So then I think the physical world, like the earth. Okay. Gestalt. Okay, so this is on the right side is Fritz Perls. Okay, if you ever see videos of this person, it's very interesting. He has a very, my professor pointed this out. He has a very confrontational style that we don't use a lot nowadays. It was also interesting when I was watching the video of him, he's like smoking and clients smoking cigarettes, and it's just like goes to show it's just a very different time. So you have to take this stuff in the context of the time. So Gestalt is not a person. It is a word which means a form, figure, a configuration unified as a whole. So it assumes that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay. And the whole idea of it is to look at the different parts of yourself. Growth takes place when the client integrates disowned parts of the identity. So, yeah, like I said, you're looking into yourself, looking at your different parts and integrating them. So the concept of retroflexion means the act of doing to yourself what you wish to do to someone else. So an example of that is you're super angry at, your parents or whoever for harming you and hurting you growing up, whatever it is. And then you might start to self-harm. So you take out that anger onto yourself. Unexpressed emotions. So he viewed unexpressed emotions as unfinished business. So he was kind of trying to help people understand and express those unexpressed emotions. And he worked a lot in the here and now. So he brought a lot of awareness to what was happening in the moment. So, for example, if a client is, like, take the client who's super jittery and nervous, he may point out, or a Gestalt therapist may point out, I'm noticing that you're fidgeting a lot right now. What are you feeling in this moment? So it's bringing the awareness to what's happening in the room. Okay. And then empty chair is a really cool technique. Out of this theory, I find, as much as I'm gonna be honest, I was kind of weirded out, or I wasn't a super fan when I watched his video of how he was giving the therapy. This theory is actually really smart in that by focusing on the here and now, you're able to bypass a lot of your mental guards and really get to how you're feeling. So the empty chair is a super powerful technique where the client basically may have a conversation with an empty chair, which represents a part of themselves. Or they may even like switch back and forth, sitting in the other chair and embodying that part of themselves, whether that is, the part of myself that wants to make this decision or that decision, or two parts of your sexuality, or two parts of, like, I saw in the internship site, my the like founder, the practice leader, she gave an example of a person who was really stressed, and they felt that feeling in their legs. So she had the person have a conversation with their legs in the empty chair, and it was very powerful. Another key feature of this therapy is confrontation, and yeah, so gently confronting and challenging the client. And the old school, like, real original Gestalt was super confrontational, which may not be as applicable in how we practice therapy today. And he believed in 5 layers of neurosis. So the fake phony layer is on top. Phobic, I'm scared to let people know who I really am. Impasse layer is where you're stuck. Implosive layer is like you're starting to expose those things, your deeper self. And then explosive layer is like you have exploded into this sparkling human who's completely authentic, and you feel relief from that. That's in my own words, okay? And then now we will get into person-centered theory, okay? So this is a very humanistic theory, and this is when I took intro to counseling, this was really the first theory I was introduced to, and it's really aligned to how we practice counseling generally. It's aligned to like the ACA kind of code of ethics and orientation, and I almost see it as kind of like, in my opinion, this is basic counseling skills, okay? But by introducing this theory, Carl Rogers really, conceptualized a new way of counseling clients, a new posture towards clients. So the assumption is that people have an innate drive toward growth and self-improvement. So we're assuming that people want better for themselves. Okay? And people are inherently good and capable of self-understanding and change. So he just believed that people are fundamentally good, and they themselves want better for themselves. It's a little repetitive, but what I'm trying to say here is it's different from confronting the client, or like, kind of older ways of doing therapy where it's like almost like pathologizing. What's wrong with you? All right? But now we're looking at it as they want better for themselves and they're a good person. It's just we need to provide the right environment for them to realize that and realize, actualize that version of themselves. So unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence are the main core concepts, as well as non-directive approach. So unconditional positive regard doesn't mean that you are loving your client and like, okay, your client told you that they had robbed a bank and all this stuff, and you're like, oh, this person is a stand-up citizen. And no, you're not gonna, that's not what it means. It means that you meet the client who robbed the bank and did whatever, and you're able to see them and still, generally be able to view them through this lens of that they are capable of self-understanding and change, and that whatever situation, circumstances in their life led them down this path, but that they are capable of contributing and being a good person. So within that unconditional positive regard is being non-judgmental. And then there's the concept of empathy, which I don't really have to explain. We are deeply empathetic towards our clients, not just sympathetic. We're understanding and trying to get into their shoes. What would I do if I was in their situation and I lived this life and whatever? I don't know. This is hard to explain because it's very straightforward. Empathy, we want to be empathetic towards our clients, okay? Congruence is kind of like being genuine, but it's like, let me give an example. So if a client is mentioning, like if a client has been talking this whole time about how they want to do better for their lives and that they want to find a partner and they want to do all these things and they want to go to school, okay? And then they're just staying home and they haven't taken up on any of their social invitations, and they're kind of not really doing anything to put themselves on that path that they want. Then in the session, you might point out that discrepancy gently. So congruence means you're not going to just sit there and listen to a client and then in your head be thinking one thing and be saying a completely different thing. Okay? So on some level, you want to not be wearing a mask and be true to who you are and what you're thinking. Obviously with some caveats, okay? And then non-directive approach is that the client is the expert and you're gonna be there along the ride with them. You're not gonna be telling them what to do. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna move into the next thing. So the other theories theorists to know that don't necessarily fit perfectly into these categories. So on the far left is Eric Berne, and he came up with transactional analysis. In the middle is William Glasser, who is the father of reality therapy and choice theory. And then on the right is Michael White and David Epstein, who are the co-founders of narrative therapy. So here we have Eric Berne. So he wrote a really, really awesome book that I actually have in my house. It's called Games People Play. And it's the power of this theory, which is actually called transactional analysis, is that it's really simple and it's a great way of explaining a psychology concept to clients. And you can literally teach them this in just a few minutes. So the idea is that every person kind of has these three ego states. And the thing about this theory is it's actually related to psychoanalysis. I just couldn't fit it in, and I honestly didn't think of it until I was making this PowerPoint. But it is more of like a modern twist on it, which puts more, it's more like, I think it's more empowering for the client. So everyone has these three ego states: parent, adult, and child, which is similar, if you remember, to superego, ego, and id. So the parent is critical or nurturing. There's these two different sides of it where, you know, it could either be like very kind and, you know, caring, whatever, or it could be critical. And then the adult is basically conscious. You're very logical. You're talking like adult, rational. It makes sense, grounded in reality. And the child could be, is really, it could be rebellious. It could be bratty. It could be free, carefree. Okay. Or it could be well adapted. So you're either operating from either of these three. Actually, I'm just going to say I really don't know what that adapted means, but really you're either operating from one of these three categories, which is parent, adult, or child. So when you're interacting with somebody else, they are also coming from one of these three: parent, adult, or child. So a lot of conflict arises when you have these crossed interactions. Okay. So for example, and this is like, comes up a lot in relationships. So, let's say, right, you're interacting with a sibling, okay, and they're being super critical, like, of what you're doing. Like, oh, you shouldn't be going out every night, and you're partying way too much, you're a mess, okay? And that if they're talking from that, you know, position, they're talking from the parent. They're being a critical parent. And you may be you may respond from your child. Okay. So you're going to be like, maybe rebellious. So I am going to do what I want and I'm going to party and live my life. Screw you. Okay. So that is that cross interaction. What we want ideally is in our interactions is to be having a complementary, okay, transaction. So as you can see, there's three types of transactions. There's crossed, so that's parent to child or child to parent, okay? And then there's complementary, which is from the same ego state, okay? So if ideally we're both responding from the adult state, okay? So as an adult, how would you express that concern? Hey, like, girl, I'm kind of worried about you because you're partying all the time. And you know, what's going on? How can I be there for you? Okay? And as an adult, in response, you may, you know, reply back, maybe like, hey, I'm fine. I'm just having fun and I have a lot of free time right now. So I'm just investing my time in being social. Okay? So that's both responses are very logical, rational, okay? And then, so I explained crossed, complementary, and then there's another type of interaction called ulterior. So they're talking to you from one place, but they're really talking to you from another place, okay? So for example, they may be telling you, hey, I need you to, okay, so let me change that. So, hey, I really need you to come over, help me move out of my apartment, but you know, you usually don't show up on time, so please be here on time, or I'm going to be really upset, okay? So it sounds like it's coming from its parent, okay, being really critical, but maybe you know, ulterior hidden message is from that child space of, I really need you here with me. Don't let me down. Okay. Or maybe it's coming from the hidden messages from the adult place of, I need help. Okay. Come help me out. Okay. And so it's not actually stating the real need, but you're communicating it from a different place. And so when that person replies, they may reply to you from a different ego state. They may reply from their child state, really, when what you need is an adult. Or, they may come back and criticize you when you're actually trying to feel supported. Maybe you're in your child state and you want to feel not let down. Okay. So this is transactional analysis. Really, the main concept that you're going to want to know is these 3 ego states and that there's 3 different types of transactions that can occur. And then also another note is there's different degrees of games. So when people are doing these interactions that are kind of cross or alter or whatever, and there's this pattern of interaction, it can be called a game. Hence the name Games People Play. And the degrees of games go from 1st degree to 3rd degree, and it's like a burn. The 3rd degree game is the most painful, okay? Just like a 3rd degree burn. And then the next theory is William Glasser, reality therapy and choice theory. So reality therapy hinges on choice theory, which is that humans have 5 basic needs: survival, love, belonging, and power, freedom, and fun. Simple enough. And his therapy focuses on the present and future behavior, not as concerned with the past. And he has these 2 models, the WDEP model, which is wants, doing, evaluation, and plan. So this, I believe, is in relation to putting into action change, right? And realizing, as in like actualizing what you want in your life. And then the plan uses the SAMIC model. So when you're making a plan, you want it to be simple, attainable, measurable, immediate, consistent, and committed. So this guy is really realistic. Really, I feel like if, I don't know how your parents are, but if my parents were giving me therapy, they would be giving me this reality therapy. Like, girl, you need to get to it. Okay. And so I don't know how I feel about this therapy because sometimes you need to talk about the past, but maybe this works for some people. I could see how it could work for some people. Okay. Then there is White and Epstein's narrative therapy. This is a really awesome postmodern therapy, and it is basically looking at the story of somebody's life. A key concept is you're separating people from the problem. So sometimes you'll have the person name the problem. So, like somebody struggling from OCD, instead of, talking about the OCD as a problem with the person, we'll externalize it. So let's name the OCD. What name would you give it? Would you name it Michael, right? And then, well, if the client's name isn't Michael, right? So if I have OCD, right, maybe I'll name my OCD Michael, right? And we'll talk about like, Michael's so annoying, and externalize that problem from the person. So the person is not the problem is the problem. That's kind of a quote from narrative therapy. So we talked about externalizing. The assumption is also the person is the expert on their own life. And then you may talk about unique outcomes. So has there been a time when you were able to overcome a problem? If their story is generally negative, like, oh, I'm not resilient and I can't overcome things. Like, tell me about a time when you were able to overcome a hard thing. Okay. Alternative stories is kind of similar. So you're picking out different like allowing them to tell different stories of their life where, things were different. And then reauthoring is, so if they have this, if they tell you that, so we do the whole one technique that's common in narrative therapy is to do a timeline, a lifeline, and they'll tell you their whole story. And then what you might do is to reauthor that story. So if someone views their life as a series of terrible traumatic events, they may reauthor their life story and tell it as all these times that they've overcame hardship, and the story of how they became a successful XYZ entrepreneur, right? That they became a loving parent, right? Whatever it is. So that's reauthoring, changing the way we tell our story. And then, so challenging problem set. So you may gently challenge the client. That's another technique here as well. Okay, so the last page, just like we did for the last video, this is the time to kind of lock in, and we're going to talk about the some remaining concepts that we didn't really get to, and that you could just kind of, we just need a quick review of. Okay, so Robert Carkhuff came up with this way of rating counselor responses. So this is on a 1 to 5 scale. So 1 is just harmful, like your response is going to make the client feel bad. 2, it's not helpful. 3 is interchangeable or basic. So that would be like the client already knows this and you're just basically giving back to them. 4 is you're adding something. Maybe you're reflecting meaning. You're letting them see a different side of this. And then 5 is you're highly facilitative. You're really moving the client towards whatever their goal is and helping them understand themselves better, the situation, or growth, self-actualization, whatever. Okay, Gerard, Egan. So he basically pointed out that clients are more open with counselors who seem genuine. He wrote a whole book. I think it's called The Skilled Helper. Okay. And then Francine Thorne, she is the person who came up with eclecticism, which a lot of counselors practice today, which is basically integrating different theories. But she did say that with eclecticism, it still needs to be scientifically supported, whatever you're doing with your clients. This person, Maxie Maltzby Jr., came up with another type of behavior therapy. It's called rational behavior therapy. Let me see in my notes if I actually can tell you about that. So this included rational imagery. So imagining a stressful situation and changing the feelings using rational, logical, scientific thought. So I'm really scared to fly on planes. So we're going to imagine flying on that plane and using actually rational and scientific thought. Planes are statistically safer than driving in a car, right? And trying to process the issue that way. Okay. It relies on REBT, which is Albert Ellis, Albert Ellis's theory, and he also has the client write a written self-analysis, which that's pretty cool. That's pretty powerful. Okay. Then Anna O was the first psychoanalytic client, and she basically was hypnotized during therapy. That was a technique that was used, and it helped her to access memories and unconscious things that let me see here. And the person who was her therapist was Joseph Brewer. And she was able to achieve catharsis, which is that relief from talking about whatever was haunting her. And then Wolfgang Kohler is this Gestalt person, and he basically, I think he did some research with chimpanzees, and he came up with this idea of insight, just basically, in very simple terms, it's someone figuring something out. That's my understanding of it. Okay, so I don't know why we had to, I mean, good for him that he was credited with this. Okay, so Wolfgang Kohler, remember it. First part of his name is a wolf, and he did research with another animal, just a chimp. Through that, he found out about insight. Okay, so then there's Bandler and Grinder. Neuro-linguistic programming is what they came up with, which is popular with business people and salespeople. It's kind of like one of those pop psychology concepts. Let me see if I can tell you what that actually is. I don't know if oh yeah, so here we go. So there's two ideas, which are like reframing and anchoring. Reframing is like what it sounds like, and anchoring is you're thinking of an outside desirable, or you're incorporating an outside desirable stimulus when doing a phobia. Okay. And then Alan E. Ivy is the person who came up with personal construct theory and fixed role therapy. So fixed role therapy is you literally give the client a script of how to, talk to themselves or act, and then they practice that script. Motivational interviewing is common with substance abuse. So you're helping a person along that process of contemplating and making a change. And it's very, very non-judgmental. The client is the expert, and you're just coming along the journey with them and helping them understand what they want. Okay? There's a couple of steps within motivational interviewing. I would just encourage you to just look it up. So that is it for this video. Thank you for watching this. I hope this kind of improves your scores in the counseling and helping relationships section, and really covers most of the key theories that you need to know. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. And happy studying. Best of luck. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and get some rest. All right.